In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where the Taliban ruled through fear and brutality, a young woman from a small Canadian town was about to make military history. She had grown up hunting deer in the forests of Ontario, never imagining that her steady hands and sharp eyes would one day save lives from nearly 4 kilometers away. The generals called her shot impossible. The physics said it couldn't be done. The wind conditions made it suicide to even attempt. But when innocent lives hung in the balance and conventional warfare had failed, Corporal Sarah Chen raised her rifle, steadied her breathing, and prepared to pull a trigger that would echo around the world. What happened next would force military leaders to rewrite the rules of engagement, prove that courage has no gender, and demonstrate that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most desperate moments. This is the true story of the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, the woman who made it, and how one bullet changed the course of a war. Sarah Chen never expected her life to lead her to the mountains of Afghanistan. Growing up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, she was the daughter of a Chinese immigrant father who worked at the local paper mill and a French-Canadian mother who taught elementary school. Their small house on the outskirts of town bordered dense forests where Sarah learned to hunt with her grandfather, a World War II veteran who rarely spoke about his service but passed down his knowledge of firearms with quiet precision. Every weekend from age 12, Sarah would follow her grandfather through the woods, learning to read wind patterns, judge distances, and most importantly, control her breathing. Her grandfather, Jean-Baptiste Moreau, had been a sniper in the Canadian Army during the liberation of Europe, though he never shared those stories with his granddaughter. Instead, he taught her patience, discipline, and respect for the power she held in her hands. Sarah's natural talent was undeniable. By 15, she could consistently hit targets at ranges that impressed even seasoned hunters. Her grandfather would set up increasingly challenging shots, teaching her to compensate for wind, elevation, and even the rotation of the earth on extreme long-range attempts. What started as weekend hunting trips became an obsession with precision that would define her future. After graduating high school, Sarah felt lost. Her grades were good enough for university, but she lacked direction. The small-town life felt suffocating, and she craved adventure beyond the familiar forests of northern Ontario. It was her grandfather who suggested the military, though his reasons remained private. Years later, she would understand that he saw something in her that reminded him of his own wartime service, a combination of natural ability and mental toughness that couldn't be taught. The Canadian Armed Forces Recruitment Office in Thunder Bay was a modest building downtown, staffed by Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a veteran of peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Kosovo.
When Sarah walked in on a crisp October morning in 2008, she wasn't sure what she wanted.
She knew she didn't want to spend her life in an office, and the military offered training, travel, and purpose that appealed to her restless spirit. Sergeant Rodriguez was initially skeptical when this young woman, barely 19 and weighing perhaps 120 pounds, expressed interest in combat roles. The Canadian military had only recently opened all positions to women, and cultural resistance remained strong, particularly in specialized fields like sniping. However, something in Sarah's demeanor, a quiet confidence and steady gaze, convinced him to take her seriously. During the initial interview process, Sarah mentioned her hunting background almost casually. When pressed for details, she reluctantly admitted to consistently taking deer at ranges exceeding 400 meters with iron sights. Sergeant Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Such accuracy was rare even among experienced soldiers. He made a note to recommend her for marksmanship evaluation during basic training. Basic training at Canadian Forces Base Borden was a shock to Sarah's system. The physical demands were manageable. Her years of hiking through rough terrain had prepared her body, but the mental adjustment proved more challenging. The regimented lifestyle, constant scrutiny, and aggressive competition among recruits created an environment unlike anything she had experienced in her quiet hometown. Sarah excelled in firearms training from day one. While other recruits struggled with basic rifle proficiency, she consistently scored in the expert range. Her instructors began to take notice, particularly Master Corporal James Thompson, a former sniper instructor who had served in Afghanistan during the early years of Canadian involvement there. Thompson was a hard man, weathered by combat and skeptical of new recruits who showed promise. He had seen too many soldiers who performed well on the range but cracked under the pressure of real combat. However, Sarah's performance was different. She didn't just hit targets, she displayed an intuitive understanding of ballistics that typically took years to develop. One afternoon during advanced marksmanship training, Thompson set up a challenge that went beyond standard qualification requirements. At 800 meters, far beyond typical infantry engagement ranges, He placed a series of targets in varying wind conditions. Most recruits would struggle to hit the target boards, let alone the scoring zones. Sarah not only hit every target, but grouped her shots within inches of center mass. After the exercise, Thompson approached Sarah privately. His weathered face showed a mixture of curiosity and respect as he asked about her background. When she described her hunting experiences with her grandfather, Thompson nodded slowly. He had encountered natural shooters before, but Sarah's combination of technical skill and mental composure was exceptional. Thompson began working with Sarah during off hours, introducing her to military precision shooting techniques that went far beyond hunting applications. He taught her about different ammunition types, scope adjustments, and environmental factors that affected bullet flight over extreme distances. More importantly, he began preparing her mentally for the realities of using these skills against human targets. The transition from hunting animals to potentially engaging enemy combatants was psychologically complex. Thompson had seen promising shooters fail when confronted with the moral weight of their actions. However, Sarah demonstrated a mature understanding of the responsibility that came with her abilities. She viewed precision shooting not as a path to glory, but as a tool for protecting others, a perspective that impressed her instructors. As basic training concluded, Sarah's exceptional marksmanship scores earned her placement in the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, one of Canada's most respected combat units. The regiment was preparing for deployment to Afghanistan, where Canadian forces were engaged in counterinsurgency operations against Taliban forces in Kandahar province. Before deployment, Sarah underwent specialized sniper training at Canadian Forces Base Gagetown in New Brunswick. The course was grueling, designed to eliminate all but the most dedicated and capable candidates. Of the 30 soldiers who began the program, only 8 would graduate, and Sarah was the only woman in her class. The physical demands were intense. Students were required to carry heavy equipment over long distances, remain motionless in uncomfortable positions for hours, and maintain shooting accuracy despite exhaustion and stress. Sarah's hunting background served her well, but the military standards pushed her abilities to new levels. Instructor Staff Sergeant David Kim was a veteran sniper with multiple deployments to Afghanistan. He had initially opposed including women in sniper training, believing the physical and psychological demands were too extreme. However, Sarah's performance gradually changed his perspective. She not only matched her male counterparts in technical skills, but often exceeded them in patience and attention to detail. The psychological component of sniper training proved as challenging as the physical aspects. Students were taught to think like hunters while maintaining the discipline of soldiers. They learned to study enemy behavior patterns, identify high-value targets, and make split-second decisions about engagement priorities. For Sarah, this mental training built upon instincts developed during years of hunting, but the stakes were infinitely higher. One exercise particularly tested Sarah's resolve. Students were required to maintain observation on a simulated enemy position for 72 hours, documenting movement patterns and identifying priority targets. The exercise was designed to replicate the patient observation that real combat operations often demanded. While several students broke under the psychological pressure of prolonged isolation and responsibility, Sarah completed the exercise with detailed logs that impressed her instructors. As training progressed, Sarah began to understand that sniping was as much art as science. Successful long-range shooting required understanding countless variables: wind speed and direction at multiple points along the bullet's path, temperature effects on ammunition performance, atmospheric pressure, and even the subtle influence of the Earth's rotation on extreme-range shots. The technical knowledge was complemented by intuitive skills that couldn't be taught, only developed through experience. Her grandfather's training proved invaluable during this period. The patience he had taught her, the respect for precision, and the deep understanding of ballistics provided a foundation that military training refined rather than replaced. Sarah began to appreciate how her grandfather's quiet lessons in the Ontario woods had prepared her for challenges he could never have explicitly described. The final phase of sniper training involved live-fire exercises against reactive targets at varying ranges. Students were evaluated not only on accuracy, but on their ability to make rapid calculations under pressure, communicate effectively with spotters, and maintain equipment in field conditions. Sarah excelled in all areas, earning recognition as the top graduate in her class. Staff Sergeant Kim, who had initially doubted her capabilities, became one of Sarah's strongest supporters. In his final evaluation, he noted her exceptional technical skills, mature judgment, and potential for leadership in combat situations. More importantly, he recognized that Sarah possessed the rare combination of deadly precision and moral compass that defined the best military marksman. Upon graduation, Sarah was assigned to 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. scheduled for deployment to Afghanistan in spring 2009. The unit was experienced, having completed previous rotations in the volatile Kandahar region where Taliban insurgents maintained strong influence despite years of international military presence. As deployment approached, Sarah underwent final preparations that included cultural briefings, language training, and specialized equipment familiarization. She was issued the Macmillan TAC 50 rifle system, the primary Canadian military sniper weapon, capable of precision engagement at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters in expert hands. The weapon would become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the coming months. The night before departure, Sarah called her grandfather from the base. Jean-Baptiste listened quietly as she described her training and impending deployment. When she finished, there was a long silence before he spoke in his accented English, telling her that he was proud but worried. He offered advice that seemed simple but carried the weight of experience. Trust your training, protect your comrades, and never forget that every shot has consequences beyond the target. Sarah arrived in Afghanistan in April 2009, stepping off the transport aircraft into heat and dust that seemed to immediately penetrate every piece of equipment. Kandahar Airfield was a massive international base, home to forces from multiple nations engaged in the complex counterinsurgency campaign against Taliban forces throughout southern Afghanistan. The reality of combat deployment hit Sarah immediately. This wasn't training with simulated enemies in controlled conditions. Intelligence briefings described an adaptive enemy that used improvised explosive devices, suicide attacks, and guerrilla tactics against coalition forces. The Taliban controlled significant territory and enjoyed popular support in many rural areas, making every operation dangerous and unpredictable. Sarah's unit was assigned to Forward Operating Base Wilson, a smaller outpost in Jari district west of Kandahar city. The region was heavily contested, with Taliban forces maintaining influence despite years of coalition operations. Canadian forces were tasked with training Afghan National Army units while conducting patrol operations designed to disrupt insurgent activities. The Forward Operating Base was a stark contrast to the relative comfort of Kandahar Airfield. Surrounded by blast walls and concertina wire, the base housed several hundred soldiers in basic accommodations, designed for functionality rather than comfort. The constant threat of rocket attacks, and the knowledge that Taliban forces operated in the surrounding area, created an atmosphere of controlled tension. During her first briefing at FOB Wilson, Sarah met her team leader, Sergeant First Class Michael Barnes, a veteran sniper with 3 previous deployments to Afghanistan. Barnes was initially skeptical about having a female sniper in his team, not because of doubts about Sarah's abilities, but because of the additional complications that gender might create in an already complex operational environment. Barnes's concerns were practical rather than prejudiced. Taliban forces had shown particular brutality toward female soldiers, and rescue operations would be complicated if Sarah were captured. Additionally, some Afghan National Army units remained uncomfortable working with women in combat roles, potentially affecting operational cooperation. However, Barnes' doubts began to fade as he observed Sarah's professionalism and competence. During initial range exercises at the base, she demonstrated the accuracy that had impressed her instructors during training. More importantly, she adapted quickly to the operational environment, learning patrol procedures, communication protocols, and the countless details that distinguish training from combat. Sarah's first combat operation came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated Taliban fighters were positioning improvised explosive devices along Highway 1, the main road connecting Kandahar to other major cities. Canadian forces were tasked with conducting a clearing operation, searching for bombs while maintaining overwatch against potential enemy attacks. The mission launched before dawn, with Sarah positioned on a ridge overlooking the highway, while patrol elements searched the roadway below. Her role was to provide early warning of enemy movement and eliminate threats beyond the range of infantry weapons. The responsibility was enormous, knowing that soldiers' lives depended on her vigilance and accuracy. As the sun rose over the Afghan landscape, Sarah experienced her first taste of the patient observation that defined much of sniper work. Through her scope, she watched the patrol elements methodically search the road while monitoring distant ridges for signs of enemy activity. The heat was already becoming oppressive, and she knew the day would test her endurance as much as her skills. Hours passed without incident, but Sarah maintained focus, remembering her grandfather's lessons about patience and her instructor's warnings about complacency. In this environment, threats could materialize instantly, and the price of inattention was measured in casualties rather than missed opportunities. The radio crackled with routine updates from patrol elements, but Sarah's attention was caught by movement on a distant ridge approximately 1,000 meters away. Through her scope, she identified two figures attempting to conceal themselves while observing the Canadian patrol below. The positioning and behavior suggested enemy reconnaissance, possibly preparing an attack on the exposed soldiers. Sarah reported the contact through her radio, describing the target location and requesting permission to engage. The patrol commander faced a difficult decision. The figures had not yet displayed weapons or demonstrated hostile intent, but their behavior was suspicious and their position was ideal for launching an attack. After consultation with headquarters, permission was granted to engage if the targets displayed weapons or made aggressive movements toward the patrol. Sarah adjusted her scope settings for the range and environmental conditions, then settled into shooting position while maintaining observation through her scope. Minutes later, one of the figures raised what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, aiming toward the patrol below. Sarah took a deep breath, steadied her crosshairs on center mass of the target, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth pressure her grandfather had taught her years ago in the Ontario woods. The shot struck true, eliminating the threat before the enemy fighter could launch his attack. The second figure immediately fled, disappearing into terrain that would have made pursuit dangerous and probably futile. Sarah's first combat engagement was complete, successful, and probably saved lives among the patrol below. The psychological impact of her first kill was immediate and complex. Despite all her training and mental preparation, taking a human life created emotions that no simulation could replicate. Sarah felt relief that she had protected her comrades, but also a weight of responsibility that would remain with her throughout her deployment. Sergeant Barnes approached Sarah after the mission, offering quiet words of support that acknowledged both her professional success and the personal cost of her actions. His acceptance and respect marked a turning point in their working relationship, beginning a partnership that would prove crucial in the months ahead. As word of Sarah's successful engagement spread throughout the unit, she began to earn acceptance among soldiers who had initially been curious or skeptical about serving with a female sniper. Combat performance was the ultimate measure of worth in this environment, and Sarah had proven herself when lives were at stake. However, she also attracted unwanted attention from military leadership and media representatives eager to highlight the presence of women in combat roles. Sarah preferred to focus on her duties rather than serve as a symbol, but she understood that her presence represented larger issues about gender equality in military service. The weeks following Sarah's first combat engagement were filled with routine patrol operations, base security duties, and training exercises with Afghan National Army units. The tempo of operations was high, with Taliban forces maintaining pressure on coalition positions through rocket attacks, improvised explosive devices, and small-scale ambushes. Sarah's role evolved beyond traditional sniper duties, as commanders recognized her exceptional marksmanship skills and mature judgment. She was often assigned to provide overwatch for high-risk operations, positioned to engage threats that exceeded the capabilities of standard infantry weapons. Her presence provided patrol commanders with confidence that long-range threats could be neutralized quickly and accurately. During this period, Sarah formed a close working relationship with her spotter, Corporal David Martinez, an experienced soldier with expertise in target identification and ballistic calculations. The partnership between sniper and spotter was crucial for successful long-range engagements, requiring absolute trust and seamless communication under pressure. Martinez had initially been skeptical about working with a female soldier, influenced by traditional attitudes about women in combat. However, Sarah's professionalism and competence quickly earned his respect. More importantly, he recognized that her natural shooting ability exceeded that of many experienced snipers he had worked with previously. Together, they developed procedures and communication methods that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Sarah's technical skills were complemented by Martinez's experience with Afghan terrain and enemy tactics, creating a partnership that proved highly effective in the complex operational environment. As spring turned to summer, Taliban activity increased throughout Jari district. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgent forces were planning a major offensive designed to retake territory lost during previous coalition operations. Canadian forces prepared for intensified fighting, while continuing their mission to train Afghan security forces. Sarah's reputation as an exceptional marksman began to spread beyond her immediate unit. Other sniper teams sought her advice on long-range shooting techniques, and unit commanders specifically requested her presence for high-risk operations. However, this recognition also created pressure to perform consistently at the highest level. The psychological demands of sniper work began to accumulate as Sarah's deployment progressed. Each successful engagement saved lives, but also added to the weight of responsibility she carried. The knowledge that soldiers depended on her accuracy created stress that affected sleep and concentration, challenges that all combat snipers faced but rarely discussed openly. Sarah found solace in writing letters to her grandfather, describing the landscape and operational challenges without revealing classified details. His responses provided perspective and encouragement, reminding her that precision shooting was ultimately about protecting others rather than personal achievement. These exchanges helped her maintain focus on her mission rather than dwelling on the psychological costs. As summer intensified, so did the operational tempo. Taliban forces launched increasingly sophisticated attacks against coalition positions using coordinated tactics that required careful counteraction. Sarah's unit was frequently called upon to support Afghan National Army operations, providing precision fire support that Afghan forces couldn't deliver independently. During one particularly challenging operation, Sarah was positioned to provide overwatch for an Afghan army unit attempting to clear a suspected Taliban compound. Intelligence indicated the presence of high-value targets, but the compound was heavily fortified and surrounded by civilian buildings that complicated engagement rules. As the Afghan forces approached the compound, Taliban fighters opened fire from concealed positions, pinning down the assault force and threatening to inflict heavy casualties. Sarah identified multiple enemy positions but faced difficult shooting solutions due to range, terrain, and the risk of collateral damage to nearby civilians. Working with Martinez, Sarah began engaging Taliban positions with careful, deliberate shots that eliminated threats while minimizing risk to civilians and friendly forces. Her accuracy under pressure allowed the Afghan unit to advance and ultimately secure the compound, capturing valuable intelligence about Taliban operations in the region. The operation marked a turning point in Sarah's deployment, demonstrating her ability to perform at the highest level under complex combat conditions. More importantly, it showed her adaptability and judgment in situations where technical skill alone was insufficient. As autumn approached, intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were planning a significant attack against Canadian positions, possibly involving multiple suicide bombers and coordinated assaults. Security was increased throughout the region, and sniper teams were positioned to provide early warning and precision engagement capability against high-value targets. Sarah's team was assigned to a remote observation post overlooking key approaches to FOB Wilson. The position provided excellent visibility but was isolated and vulnerable to enemy attack. The mission duration was indefinite, requiring sustained observation and readiness to engage targets at maximum range. For 3 days, Sarah and Martinez maintained their vigilant watch, surviving on minimal supplies while documenting enemy movement patterns and preparing engagement solutions for potential targets. The psychological strain of prolonged isolation and responsibility was intense, but their partnership remained solid. On the 4th day, their patience was rewarded when they identified a convoy of vehicles moving toward coalition positions under cover of darkness. The vehicle's behavior and route suggested hostile intent, but confirmation was needed before engagement authorization could be granted. As dawn broke, Sarah observed through a scope as the convoy stopped approximately 3,000 meters from their position. Armed figures emerged from the vehicles and began setting up what appeared to be heavy weapons aimed at Canadian positions. The range was extreme, near the maximum effective distance of her rifle system, but the threat to friendly forces was immediate and severe. Sarah calculated the shooting solution, while Martinez confirmed target identification and range estimation. Wind conditions were challenging, with variable speeds and directions that would affect bullet flight over the extended distance. Additionally, the morning light created heat mirage that could affect target acquisition. Permission to engage was granted after intelligence confirmed the convoy's hostile intentions. Sarah prepared for one of the most challenging shots of her career, knowing that success would prevent an attack on coalition forces, while failure might result in significant casualties among her comrades. As she settled into firing position, Sarah drew upon years of training and the fundamental lessons her grandfather had taught her in the forests of Ontario. The techniques were the same whether hunting deer or engaging enemy combatants. Control breathing, steady the rifle, calculate environmental factors, and execute the shot with smooth trigger pressure. The shot struck the primary target precisely, eliminating the threat leader and causing the remaining enemy fighters to flee in confusion. The successful engagement prevented what intelligence later confirmed would have been a devastating attack against Canadian positions using heavy weapons and explosives. News of Sarah's successful long-range engagement spread rapidly through military command channels. The shot distance and conditions represented exceptional marksmanship by any standard, but the tactical impact was even more significant. By eliminating the threat before it could be executed, Sarah had prevented casualties and disrupted Taliban operational planning. However, Sarah herself was more focused on the cumulative effect of months in combat than on individual achievements. The constant stress of life and death decisions was taking its toll, despite her professional success and the recognition she received from military leadership. As her deployment neared its conclusion, Sarah reflected on how profoundly the experience had changed her understanding of herself and her capabilities. The young woman who had left Thunder Bay seeking adventure had discovered abilities and responsibilities she never could have imagined. More importantly, she had learned that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to function effectively despite it. The girl who had learned to hunt in the Canadian wilderness had become one of the most accomplished military marksmen of her generation, but at a personal cost that would take years to fully understand. As she prepared to return home, Sarah knew that the experiences of her deployment would influence the rest of her life, shaping her perspective on duty, sacrifice, and the complex moral landscape of modern warfare. Sarah's second deployment to Afghanistan came 18 months after her return to Canada. The time at home had been difficult, marked by nightmares, hypervigilance, and the challenge of readjusting to civilian life between military duties. The quiet forests around Thunder Bay that had once brought her peace now felt empty and purposeless compared to the intensity of combat operations. During her time at Canadian Forces Base Petawawa, Sarah had undergone additional specialized training while serving as an instructor for new sniper candidates. Teaching others helped her process her own experiences while refining techniques that had proven effective in combat. However, the relative safety and routine of garrison life left her feeling restless and disconnected from the sense of purpose that combat operations provided. When the opportunity arose to return to Afghanistan with a special operations unit tasked with training Afghan sniper teams, Sarah volunteered immediately. Her combat experience and demonstrated abilities made her an ideal candidate for the mission, despite concerns from military psychologists about the psychological impact of extended combat exposure. The Afghanistan that Sarah returned to in late 2010 was different from her previous deployment. Coalition strategy had shifted toward training Afghan security forces while gradually reducing international troop levels. The timeline for withdrawal was accelerating, creating pressure to transfer capabilities to Afghan forces as quickly as possible while maintaining security in contested regions. Sarah's new assignment placed her with Joint Task Force 2, Canada's elite special operations unit, working alongside American and British counterparts in complex operations throughout southern Afghanistan. The multinational team was tasked with developing Afghan sniper capabilities while conducting high-value target operations against Taliban leadership. The operational environment had evolved significantly since Sarah's first deployment. Taliban forces had adapted their tactics to counter coalition advantages, using improvised explosive devices, suicide attacks, and propaganda campaigns to maintain influence despite military pressure. The insurgents had also learned to respect the capabilities of coalition snipers, developing countermeasures that made precision shooting operations more dangerous and complex. Sarah's reputation within the special operations community was already established, but working with international partners required proving herself again to soldiers who knew her only by reputation. The British SAS and American Delta Force operators were professional but skeptical, having worked primarily with male snipers throughout their careers. Her new team leader was Major James Patterson, a British SAS officer with extensive experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Patterson was pragmatic about gender integration, caring more about operational effectiveness than social engineering. But he recognized the unique challenges that Sarah's presence might create in the complex cultural environment of Afghanistan. The first weeks of Sarah's second deployment were spent establishing rapport with her new teammates while conducting assessment operations against Taliban positions. The Special Operations Unit moved frequently, operating from temporary bases that provided access to high-priority target areas while maintaining security through mobility and unpredictability. Sarah's skills had improved significantly during her time away from combat, refined through instruction and additional training. Her understanding of advanced ballistics, environmental factors, and equipment capabilities had deepened, making her more effective at extreme ranges while reducing the time required for complex calculations. More importantly, her judgment had matured through experience and reflection. Sarah now understood the broader implications of her actions beyond immediate tactical success, considering political effects, civilian casualties, and long-term strategic consequences when evaluating potential engagements. The Special Operations Unit's primary mission involved targeting Taliban commanders who coordinated attacks against coalition and Afghan government forces. These high-value individuals were typically well protected, operating from secure compounds and moving unpredictably to avoid detection. Eliminating such targets required patience, precision, and perfect timing. Sarah's first major operation with the Special Operations Unit targeted a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating improvised explosive device attacks throughout Helmand Province. Intelligence indicated that the individual would be meeting with subordinates at a compound near the Pakistan border. providing a rare opportunity for elimination. The operation required infiltrating into Taliban-controlled territory and establishing observation positions that could monitor the target compound while remaining undetected. Sarah and her spotter, Staff Sergeant Robert Clark of the British SAS, moved into position during darkness, covering several kilometers of dangerous terrain while carrying equipment weighing more than 60 pounds. Their hide position was established in rocky terrain approximately 2,000 meters from the target compound. The location provided excellent visibility while offering concealment from enemy observation. However, the position was also exposed to extreme weather conditions and would require occupancy for potentially several days while waiting for the target to appear. For 48 hours, Sarah and Clark maintained their vigil, documenting movement patterns around the compound while enduring temperatures that exceeded 45 degrees Celsius during the day and dropped near freezing at night. The physical discomfort was secondary to the mental strain of sustained alertness in an environment where detection would likely result in capture or death. On the third day, intelligence confirmed that the target had arrived at the compound for the anticipated meeting. Through her scope, Sarah identified the Taliban commander as he moved between buildings, but achieving a clean shot required patience, as civilian family members were also present in the compound. The ethical complexity of the situation was enormous. The target was clearly a legitimate military objective, responsible for attacks that had killed coalition soldiers and Afghan civilians. However, the presence of non-combatants in the compound created risk of collateral damage that could undermine both the mission's success and broader strategic objectives. Sarah waited for nearly 6 hours, maintaining position despite physical discomfort and growing time pressure. Late in the afternoon, the target finally presented himself in an isolated area of the compound, where engagement would minimize risk to civilians. The shot was technically challenging due to range, wind conditions, and the need for immediate precision to avoid alerting other enemy fighters. Sarah's shot struck the target cleanly, eliminating the Taliban commander without alerting security personnel or harming civilians. The successful engagement was confirmed through subsequent intelligence collection, which indicated that the commander's death significantly disrupted Taliban operations in the region. However, the mission also demonstrated the increasing sophistication of Taliban counter-sniper techniques. Within minutes of the shot, enemy forces began systematic searches for the firing position using tactics that suggested professional military training. Sarah and Clark were forced to execute a dangerous withdrawal under potential enemy observation, highlighting the evolving nature of the tactical environment. The successful operation enhanced Sarah's reputation within the special operations community, but it also attracted unwanted attention from Taliban intelligence networks. Intercepted communications indicated that insurgent forces were aware of a highly capable female sniper operating in their area and were developing specific countermeasures designed to eliminate this threat. The Taliban's focus on Sarah created additional operational security challenges for her unit. Traditional sniper operations relied on concealment and surprise, but enemy awareness of her capabilities meant that her presence could be anticipated and countered. Mission planning now required deception and misdirection to maintain tactical advantage. Sarah's psychological resilience was tested more severely during her second deployment than her first. The combination of increased operational tempo, higher stakes missions, and growing enemy sophistication created stress levels that pushed even experienced operators toward their breaking points. The knowledge that Taliban forces specifically sought her capture added a personal dimension that was difficult to compartmentalize. Support from her teammates proved crucial during this period. The special operations community's culture of mutual dependence meant that personal challenges were addressed collectively rather than individually. Sarah's proven competence earned her complete acceptance among operators who measured worth through performance rather than demographics. Major Patterson recognized the unique pressures that Sarah faced and ensured that she had access to psychological support resources while maintaining operational effectiveness. The balance between individual welfare and mission requirements was delicate, but Patterson's experience managing elite units enabled him to address both concerns simultaneously. As Sarah's second deployment progressed, intelligence indicated that Taliban forces were planning a major offensive against coalition positions throughout southern Afghanistan. The operation was reportedly coordinated by a senior commander who had recently arrived from Pakistan with additional resources and fighters. Coalition response involved increased surveillance and targeted elimination of Taliban leadership before the offensive could be launched. Sarah's unit was tasked with locating and eliminating the senior commander, a mission that required penetrating deep into Taliban-controlled territory where enemy forces maintained significant advantages. The operation began with extensive intelligence collection to identify the commander's location and movement patterns. Intercepts indicated that he was operating from a fortified compound in a valley that provided natural defense against coalition air support, while offering multiple escape routes if ground forces approached. Sarah's team infiltrated the area during a moonless night, establishing multiple observation positions that could monitor different approaches to the target compound. The coordination required was complex, involving multiple sniper teams, reconnaissance elements, and quick reaction forces positioned to prevent the target's escape. For 5 days, the surveillance operation continued without results. The target remained within the compound, protected by security measures that made direct assault impractical and precision strikes impossible due to civilian presence. Patience became the primary tactical requirement, as intelligence indicated the commander was planning to move soon. On the 6th day, Sarah identified the target as he emerged from the compound to conduct a reconnaissance of defensive positions. The range was extreme, nearly 3,000 meters, with challenging environmental conditions that included variable winds and heat mirage that distorted target acquisition. The shot required calculations that pushed Sarah's technical knowledge to its limits. Bullet flight time at that range was nearly 4 seconds, during which wind conditions could change significantly. Additionally, the target's movement required leading the shot while accounting for multiple environmental factors that affected trajectory. Sarah's successful engagement eliminated the Taliban commander and disrupted the planned offensive before it could begin. Intelligence later confirmed that the operation's failure caused Taliban forces to abandon their plans and withdraw from the region, preventing what could have been devastating attacks against coalition and Afghan government positions. The technical achievement of the shot impressed even experienced snipers within the special operations community. The combination of range, conditions, and tactical pressure represented world-class marksmanship by any standard. However, Sarah remained focused on the operational impact rather than personal recognition. Following the successful mission, Sarah was approached by senior intelligence officers who wanted to debrief her experiences with Taliban counter-sniper techniques. Her first-hand observations of enemy adaptation provided valuable insights for developing countermeasures and training programs for other sniper teams. The debriefing sessions revealed the extent to which Taliban forces had studied coalition sniper capabilities and developed sophisticated responses. Enemy fighters were now using decoy positions, rapid movement techniques, and coordinated counterfires designed to neutralize sniper teams. The tactical environment was evolving rapidly, requiring constant adaptation. Sarah's insights contributed to updated training programs and tactical procedures that were disseminated throughout coalition sniper communities. Her experience bridged the gap between technical expertise and practical application under combat conditions, providing valuable knowledge that enhanced overall operational effectiveness. However, the psychological toll of extended combat operations was becoming increasingly apparent. Sarah's sleep patterns were disrupted by hypervigilance and recurring nightmares. Concentration during non-operational periods became difficult, and she found herself constantly scanning for potential threats, even in secure areas. The symptoms were recognized by unit medical personnel as normal responses to extended combat stress, but they also indicated the need for careful monitoring to prevent more serious psychological casualties. Sarah's value as an operational asset had to be balanced against her long-term health and welfare. Major Patterson made the decision to rotate Sarah to lighter duties while maintaining her availability for high-priority operations. The adjustment allowed her to recover psychologically while continuing to contribute her expertise when situations specifically required her unique capabilities. During this period, Sarah began working more extensively with Afghan sniper students, transferring her knowledge to local forces who would eventually assume responsibility for security operations. The training mission provided purpose and meaning while reducing the direct combat stress that had been accumulating over months of high-intensity operations. The Afghan students presented unique challenges that differed from training Canadian recruits. Many lacked formal education, requiring instruction methods that relied on demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. Cultural differences also affected training approaches, particularly regarding women instructing male soldiers. Sarah's success with Afghan students came through patience and respect for cultural sensitivities while maintaining professional standards. Her proven combat experience earned credibility that overcame initial resistance, and her teaching methods adapted to local communication styles while preserving essential technical content. Several of her Afghan students demonstrated exceptional natural ability, reminiscent of Sarah's own development years earlier. Working with these individuals provided professional satisfaction, while contributing to the broader mission of developing indigenous security capabilities. As 2011 progressed, coalition strategy shifted more dramatically toward withdrawal and transition of responsibilities to Afghan forces. The timeline for reducing international troop levels accelerated, creating pressure to complete training missions and transfer equipment while maintaining security during the transition period. Sarah's unit received orders to intensify training operations while preparing for redeployment to Canada. The dual mission created operational challenges as training requirements competed with continuing combat operations against Taliban forces who sought to exploit coalition withdrawal. The psychological complexity of withdrawal after years of sacrifice was difficult for many soldiers to accept. Progress had been made in developing Afghan capabilities, but significant challenges remained regarding corruption, competence, and commitment within local security forces. The question of whether the mission's objectives had been achieved remained disputed among military professionals. For Sarah personally, the approaching end of her second deployment created mixed emotions. The intensity and purpose of combat operations had provided meaning that civilian life seemed to lack, but the psychological cost of extended warfare was becoming unsustainable. The contradiction between professional fulfillment and personal welfare was difficult to resolve. Her final major operation involved supporting an Afghan National Army unit conducting clearance operations in a valley where Taliban forces had re-established control following coalition withdrawal from the area. The mission was designed to demonstrate Afghan independence while providing discreet support from international advisors. The operation revealed both the progress and limitations of Afghan security force development. Technical capabilities had improved significantly through training and equipment provision, but tactical judgment and unit cohesion remained inconsistent under pressure. Sarah's presence provided confidence that enhanced Afghan performance while highlighting continuing dependencies. During the operation, Sarah engaged multiple targets at ranges that demonstrated her continued technical proficiency, while operating under rules of engagement that required extreme discrimination to avoid civilian casualties. Her precision and judgment enabled the Afghan unit to achieve objectives with minimal collateral damage. The successful mission marked the completion of Sarah's training responsibilities and her preparation for return to Canada. Her contributions to developing Afghan sniper capabilities had exceeded expectations, creating a foundation for indigenous precision shooting programs that would continue after coalition departure. However, the personal cost of 2 combat deployments was becoming increasingly apparent. Sarah's worldview had been fundamentally altered by experiences that few people could understand or relate to. The transition back to garrison life and eventually civilian society would require adjustments that might prove more challenging than combat itself. As her aircraft departed Afghanistan for the final time, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone since first arriving as an inexperienced soldier seeking adventure. The young woman who had learned to hunt in Ontario forests had become one of the most accomplished military marksmen of her generation, but the price paid in psychological trauma and emotional isolation was still being calculated. The landscape below showed a country that remained contested despite years of international intervention and sacrifice. Afghan forces were better equipped and trained than when Sarah first arrived, but significant challenges remained regarding their ability to maintain security independently. The question of whether the mission had been worthwhile would be answered by events that occurred after coalition departure. For Sarah, the mission's ultimate value lay not in strategic outcomes, but in the lives saved through her precision and the knowledge transferred to Afghan students who would continue fighting for their country's future. These tangible contributions provided meaning that transcended political debates about military intervention and nation-building. The return flight to Canada provided time for reflection that had been impossible during the intensity of combat operations. Sarah began processing experiences that she had compartmentalized during deployment, confronting emotions and memories that required careful examination to prevent lasting psychological damage. Her grandfather met her at the airport in Thunder Bay, his weathered face showing pride mixed with concern as he observed the changes that 2 combat deployments had created in his granddaughter. The reunion was emotional but complicated by Sarah's difficulty readjusting to the civilian world that now seemed foreign and disconnected from her recent experiences. The forests around Thunder Bay that had provided her first lessons in marksmanship now served as places of refuge where Sarah could begin processing the complex legacy of her military service. The skills her grandfather had taught her had proven their worth in ways he could never have imagined. But the cost of that success was still being determined. Sarah's second deployment had established her reputation as one of Canada's most accomplished military marksmen, while contributing significantly to coalition training missions and operational success. However, it had also pushed her psychological resilience to its limits, creating challenges that would influence the rest of her career and life. The young soldier who had volunteered for adventure had discovered capabilities and responsibilities that exceeded her imagination while paying prices that couldn't be calculated in purely military terms. Her story was still being written, But the foundation had been established for whatever challenges lay ahead in her continuing service and eventual transition to civilian life. The phone call that would change Sarah's life forever came on a cold February morning in 2012. She was at Canadian Forces Base Petawawa, serving as a sniper instructor while recovering from the psychological effects of 2 intense combat deployments. The voice on the other end belonged to Brigadier General William Morrison, commander of Canadian Special Operations Forces Command. General Morrison was known throughout the military as a pragmatic leader who valued results over politics, but his call to Sarah was unusual. Elite special operations units typically recruited through established channels, and direct contact from such senior leadership suggested something extraordinary was developing. The general's message was brief and cryptic. A joint international operation was being planned that required the most capable long-range marksmen available to coalition forces. The mission details were classified beyond Sarah's current clearance level, but her unique combination of proven combat performance and technical expertise made her the preferred candidate. Within hours, Sarah found herself on a transport aircraft bound for a classified location where she would receive detailed briefing on what intelligence sources were calling the most important counterterrorism operation since the elimination of Osama bin Laden. The secrecy surrounding the mission was unprecedented, involving operational security measures typically reserved for the most sensitive national intelligence operations. The briefing facility was located at a remote training site in the Canadian wilderness, chosen for its isolation and security rather than comfort. Sarah was met by Colonel David Richardson, a career special operations officer who had planned complex missions throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. His weathered appearance and direct manner suggested extensive field experience in environments where mistakes were measured in casualties. Richardson's briefing revealed a situation that challenged conventional military thinking about feasible operations. Intelligence sources had located Khalil Rahman, the Taliban's most senior military commander and architect of attacks that had killed hundreds of coalition soldiers throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan. Rahman had been the target of multiple unsuccessful operations, including drone strikes, special operations raids, and targeted assassinations. The commander's location presented unprecedented challenges that explained why previous operations had failed. Rahman was operating from a fortified compound in the remote Wakhan corridor of northeastern Afghanistan, an area so isolated and mountainous that conventional military approaches were impractical. The compound was positioned on a plateau, surrounded by peaks exceeding 6,000 meters, accessible only through narrow mountain passes easily defended by small forces. Airstrikes were impossible due to the presence of civilians, including Rahman's family and staff who were not legitimate military targets. Special operations raids faced impossible logistics challenges, requiring insertion and extraction across terrain that had defeated military forces throughout history. Previous attempts had resulted in aircraft losses and casualties without achieving objectives. However, recent intelligence had identified a vulnerability that could be exploited by an exceptional marksman under specific conditions. Satellite imagery revealed that Rahman routinely emerged from his compound to conduct morning prayers at a location exposed to observation from distant mountain ridges. The position was briefly vulnerable, but engagement would require a shot exceeding any distance previously attempted in military operations. Colonel Richardson's briefing included technical details that seemed to defy physical possibility. The target location was 3,800 meters from the nearest feasible firing position, nearly double the range of the longest confirmed sniper kills in military history. Environmental conditions included extreme altitude, variable wind patterns, and temperature fluctuations that would affect bullet trajectory in unpredictable ways. The shooting solution required calculations that pushed beyond established ballistic tables into theoretical territory, where mathematical models became unreliable. Bullet flight time would exceed 5 seconds, during which atmospheric conditions could change dramatically. The curvature of the Earth and Coriolis effect would significantly influence trajectory over such extreme distance. Sarah's initial reaction was professional skepticism. The proposed shot exceeded the capabilities of any rifle system in military inventory, even under ideal conditions. The combination of range, environmental factors, and tactical constraints created a challenge that seemed insurmountable using conventional marksmanship techniques. However, Richardson's presentation included detailed analysis by military ballistics experts who had studied the problem extensively. Advanced computer modeling suggested that success was theoretically possible under specific conditions using specialized ammunition and equipment modifications. The shot would require perfect environmental conditions and flawless execution, but mathematical analysis indicated it could be accomplished. The weapon selected for the mission was a heavily modified Macmillan TAC 5.0 rifle system equipped with experimental ammunition developed specifically for extreme range applications. The rounds incorporated advanced ballistic coefficients and temperature-stable propellants designed to maintain performance at the altitude and conditions expected in the operational area. Scope modifications included custom reticles and environmental compensation systems that could account for the complex calculations required for such extreme distance. Range-finding equipment was upgraded with military-grade laser systems, capable of precise measurement at maximum distance while remaining undetectable to enemy counter-surveillance equipment. Sarah's training for the mission began immediately at a specialized facility in the Rocky Mountains where environmental conditions approximated those expected in Afghanistan. The training regime combined physical conditioning, technical instruction, and psychological preparation for a mission that would test every aspect of her capabilities. The physical demands were extreme, requiring acclimatization to altitude exceeding 4,000 meters while carrying equipment loads that approached the limits of human endurance. The approach to the firing position would require hiking nearly 20 kilometers through terrain that challenged experienced mountaineers, all while maintaining the physical and mental condition necessary for precision shooting. Technical training involved mastering equipment modifications and calculation procedures that went beyond anything Sarah had previously encountered. Computer-assisted ballistic solutions provided starting points, but final adjustments would require intuitive understanding of environmental factors that couldn't be precisely measured or predicted. Psychological preparation proved equally challenging as mission planners attempted to prepare Sarah for the isolation and responsibility of an operation where failure might cost the lives of future coalition soldiers throughout the region. Rahman's elimination would significantly disrupt Taliban operations, but missing the shot would alert enemy forces to coalition capabilities and likely prevent future opportunities. The training period also included extensive intelligence briefings on Rahman's background, operational methods, and significance within Taliban command structure. Understanding the target's importance helped Sarah appreciate the mission's strategic value, while reinforcing the consequences of success or failure. Rahman had been responsible for developing and implementing tactics that had killed more than 400 coalition soldiers during the previous decade. His elimination would remove the Taliban's most capable military leader while demonstrating coalition reach into areas previously considered safe havens. The psychological impact on enemy morale would be significant beyond the tactical effects. Sarah's preparation included studying previous long-range shooting records to understand techniques and conditions that enabled extraordinary performance. The current record for confirmed sniper kills was held by British Corporal Craig Harrison, who had eliminated Taliban fighters at 2,475 meters using similar equipment under ideal conditions. Harrison's achievement had required exceptional skill and favorable environmental factors that aligned to create a perfect shooting opportunity. Sarah's proposed shot would exceed Harrison's distance by more than 50% under conditions that were significantly more challenging, pushing the boundaries of what was physically possible. The mathematical complexity of the required calculations was staggering. Computer models provided baseline data, but real-world conditions would require adjustments based on observations and measurements that had never been attempted at such extreme range. Success would depend on Sarah's ability to synthesize technical knowledge with intuitive understanding developed through years of experience. Mock training exercises used scaled distances and simulated conditions to practice procedures and build confidence, but the actual operational environment would present variables that couldn't be fully replicated. The training provided foundation, but ultimate success would depend on adaptation and improvisation under pressure. As preparation continued, intelligence updates refined understanding of the target's routines and the environmental conditions expected during the operational window. Rahman's morning prayer schedule had been confirmed through multiple sources, providing a predictable opportunity that occurred daily for approximately 10 minutes. Weather analysis indicated that optimal conditions occurred infrequently, requiring patience and the ability to abort the mission if environmental factors prevented success. Wind patterns at the target location were influenced by mountain topography in ways that created brief periods of relative calm interspersed with turbulent conditions. The operational plan required infiltration into position several days before the attempt to allow for equipment setup and environmental observation. Sarah would be accompanied by a minimal support team including a spotter, communications specialist, and security element capable of protecting the position while remaining undetected. The approach route had been planned using satellite imagery and intelligence from previous reconnaissance missions, but ground conditions would require navigation through terrain that had been traveled by few outsiders. Local weather could change rapidly, creating hazards that threatened mission success or team survival. Equipment selection balanced capability requirements against weight constraints imposed by the difficult approach. Every item was evaluated for necessity, with redundant systems included only for critical functions. The total equipment load approached 100 pounds per team member, near the maximum sustainable for extended movement at altitude. Communication procedures were designed to maintain contact with headquarters while preserving operational security. The remote location and mountainous terrain created challenges for radio transmission that required specialized equipment and careful frequency management. Compromise of communications could alert enemy forces to the team's presence. Medical support was limited to what the team could carry, with evacuation procedures that depended on weather conditions and aircraft availability. The remote location meant that serious injuries could prove fatal before help arrived, adding personal risk to the operational challenges. Final mission approval came from the highest levels of government, after extensive review of operational planning, legal implications, and strategic consequences. The authorization included acknowledgement that the mission pushed beyond established operational norms into territory where success was uncertain and failure might have significant consequences. Sarah's departure for the operational area was conducted under cover that concealed her identity and destination from all but essential personnel. The security measures reflected both the mission's classification and the value of protecting her identity from enemy intelligence services that had specifically targeted coalition snipers. The infiltration began with insertion by helicopter into a landing zone 50 kilometers from the target area. The aircraft's approach was timed to avoid enemy observation while providing access to routes that could be traveled on foot within the operational timeline. Weather conditions at insertion were marginal, with cloud cover that provided concealment but complicated navigation. The team's movement toward the firing position required 3 days of difficult travel through terrain that alternated between rocky ridges and deep valleys. Navigation relied on GPS systems backed up by traditional land navigation techniques in case electronic equipment failed or was compromised by enemy jamming. Altitude effects became pronounced as the team climbed toward the firing position, with reduced oxygen levels affecting both physical performance and mental acuity. Acclimatization procedures helped minimize these effects, but the combination of altitude, physical exertion, and equipment loads pushed everyone near their limits. On the second day of movement, intelligence updates confirmed that Rahan remained at the target location and maintained his routine schedule. Weather forecasts indicated improving conditions that could provide the environmental window necessary for the shot. Everything was aligning for the attempt. The firing position was reached during darkness on the third day, allowing setup procedures to begin under concealment of night. The location provided clear line of sight to the target area while offering protection from observation and defensive positions if the team's presence was detected. Equipment setup required precise positioning of rifle, spotting scope, and range-finding equipment to enable the complex calculations required for the shot. Backup systems were positioned to provide redundancy in case primary equipment failed at the critical moment. Every detail was checked and rechecked to ensure readiness. Environmental monitoring began immediately, with continuous measurement of wind speed, direction, temperature, and humidity at the firing position. However, conditions at the target location 3,800 meters away could differ significantly, requiring observation and estimation based on visual indicators and theoretical models. The first opportunity came with sunrise on the fourth day. Rahman appeared at the prayer location as intelligence had predicted, but wind conditions were unfavorable, with gusts that would make accurate shooting impossible. Sarah prepared the shot, but ultimately held fire when environmental factors exceeded acceptable parameters. Subsequent opportunities over the following days were similarly compromised by environmental conditions that prevented safe engagement. The team's supplies were limited, and extended stay in the exposed position increased risks of detection while consuming resources needed for extraction. Intelligence updates indicated that Rahman's schedule would change soon, potentially eliminating future opportunities for the shot. Political pressure was building for results, but Sarah maintained focus on technical requirements rather than external expectations. Missing the shot would be worse than not taking it. On the seventh day, atmospheric conditions aligned to create the optimal window that planners had theoretically predicted but never expected to observe in reality. Wind speeds dropped to minimal levels, temperature stabilized, and visibility improved to enable clear target acquisition at the extreme range. Sarah began her final preparations, as Rahman appeared at the prayer location. Range confirmation verified the 3,800-meter distance, while environmental measurements provided data for the ballistic calculations that would determine trajectory. Every variable was measured and incorporated into the shooting solution. The mathematical complexity required to account for all environmental factors was staggering. Bullet drop at that range exceeded 20 meters, requiring scope adjustments that pushed beyond standard reference marks. Wind drift calculations incorporated multiple measurement points and estimated conditions along the entire flight path. Coriolis effect and Earth rotation became significant factors at such extreme range, requiring adjustments that were largely theoretical, since no previous shooter had attempted such distance. Temperature effects on ammunition performance were estimated using manufacturer data extrapolated beyond tested ranges. Sarah's breathing control techniques became critical as she settled into final shooting position. The target appeared small even through maximum scope magnification, requiring precise holdover and windage adjustments based on calculations that pushed the boundaries of ballistic science. Her spotter, Master Warrant Officer John Stevens, provided continuous environmental updates and confirmed target identification while maintaining observation for security threats. The partnership that had developed during training proved crucial as they executed procedures practiced hundreds of times, but never under such conditions. As Sarah applied pressure to the trigger, she drew upon every lesson learned from her grandfather's hunting instruction, military training, and years of combat experience. The fundamental techniques remained the same regardless of range: controlled breathing, steady position, smooth trigger press, and follow-through. The shot broke cleanly, launching a bullet that would travel nearly 4 kilometers before reaching its target. Flight time exceeded 5 seconds, during which Sarah maintained position, while Stevens tracked the bullet's path through his spotting scope. Impact was confirmed as the bullet struck Rahman precisely, eliminating the Taliban commander instantly and achieving the mission's primary objective. The shot represented the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, while demonstrating capabilities that enemy forces had not believed possible. However, the team's celebration was brief, as operational security required immediate extraction to prevent enemy forces from locating their position. The shot's success would alert Taliban fighters to begin systematic searches for the firing location, making rapid departure essential for survival. The extraction movement required 3 days of difficult travel back to the pickup location while avoiding enemy patrols that were actively searching for the team. The psychological pressure of success was replaced by the physical challenge of escape through terrain that seemed even more difficult when traveled under pursuit. Helicopter extraction was completed successfully despite marginal weather conditions that tested both aircrew and aircraft capabilities. The team's return to base marked the completion of an operation that would be studied by military professionals for decades as an example of what could be achieved when technical excellence met operational necessity. Intelligence analysis confirmed that Rahman's elimination had significant impact on Taliban operations throughout the region. The psychological effect on enemy morale was as important as the tactical disruption, demonstrating coalition reach into areas previously considered safe havens. Sarah's achievement earned recognition at the highest levels of military and political leadership, but she remained focused on the technical aspects of the shot rather than its historical significance. The mathematical and physical challenges had been solved through preparation and execution rather than luck or exceptional circumstances. The success also validated training methods and equipment modifications that enhanced capabilities for future extreme-range operations. Lessons learned were incorporated into advanced sniper programs while maintaining classification of techniques that provided tactical advantage. For Sarah personally, the mission represented the culmination of skills developed over years of training and combat experience. The shot that had seemed impossible became achievable through systematic preparation and the confidence that comes from proven competence under pressure. However, the psychological impact of such extreme responsibility under global scrutiny created pressure that exceeded even her previous combat experiences. The knowledge that millions of people would eventually learn about her achievement created a burden that was difficult to process or compartmentalize. The return to Canada marked the beginning of a new phase in Sarah's career as her reputation spread throughout international military communities. Requests for consultation, training assistance, and operational support came from allied forces seeking to understand and replicate her capabilities. Yet Sarah found herself increasingly uncomfortable with celebrity status that overshadowed the technical aspects of marksmanship that truly interested her. The shot at 3,800 meters had been achieved through careful application of scientific principles rather than mystical abilities, but public perception often focused on dramatic elements rather than methodical preparation. Her grandfather's reaction to news of the record shot was characteristically understated. He understood better than anyone that exceptional shooting was the result of patience, practice, and respect for fundamental principles rather than superhuman abilities. His pride was evident, but tempered by concern for the attention that such achievement would bring. The forests around Thunder Bay continued to provide refuge where Sarah could practice skills that had brought her global recognition. The techniques her grandfather had taught her remained relevant, regardless of range or conditions, providing foundation for achievements that had exceeded both their imaginations. As Sarah reflected on her journey from small-town hunter to world record marksman, she recognized that success had come through systematic development rather than natural gifts. The shot that defied physics had been achieved through understanding and applying scientific principles under extreme conditions. The psychological cost of achieving such excellence under combat conditions remained a challenge that would influence the rest of her life. The precision that had saved lives and changed military history had been purchased at personal prices that couldn't be calculated in purely professional terms. Sarah's story continued beyond the record shot, as she transitioned toward roles that emphasized teaching and development rather than direct combat operations. Her experiences provided foundation for training programs that would enhance capabilities for future generations of military marksmen. The young woman who had learned to hunt in Canadian wilderness had achieved recognition as one of history's most accomplished marksmen, while contributing to military science and operational success. However, the true measure of her achievement lay not in records broken, but in lives saved through precision applied under impossible conditions. The shot that silenced the general's doubts had proven that determination, preparation, and technical excellence could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Sarah's legacy would be measured not only in distance achieved, but in standards established for what was possible when skill met necessity under the most demanding conditions imaginable.